Dear Mrs. Jongsma.
To Mrs. Isabel French.
Madame Blanche Rochon Charlebois.
To say Mrs. Bushinsky.
Dear Mrs. England, it was with deep regret that I learned of the death of your husband, B67380, Sergeant Ernest James England.
Private Waldo Reuben Jongsma.
Private Cecil Harold French.
Corporal suppléant Alcide Gatien Charlebois.
Trooper Albert Adolph Bushinsky, A86733 was his dog tag number. He gave his life in the service of his country.
In the Western European theater of the war on April the 12th, 1945.
On the 8th of April, 1945.
On the 5th day of April, 1945.
14 avril 1945.
On the 14th day of April, 1945.
On the 8th day of April, 1945. For official information we have received, your husband died as a result of wounds received in action against the enemy.
We pay tribute to the sacrifice he so bravely made.
In the Holten Canadian War Cemetery in the Netherlands, almost 1,400 fallen soldiers are buried. They liberated the Netherlands in the Second World War. Brave men for which the Dutch people are still very grateful. All fought for their freedom. But behind these brave men stood a family, a mother, a father, a wife, brothers and sisters, and good friends that they left behind in Canada. They also had to make a great sacrifice to liberate Europe from Hitler. We are visiting relatives of a few men who found their final resting place in Holten.
Hi, you must be Jongsma.
I am. Are you on?
I am.
It's so nice to meet you. I'm
Nice to
so
meet
glad you could come to see me. Well, the day that we were advised that he was killed, I can remember vividly. We were sitting at the kitchen table having bacon and eggs for breakfast, and the whole family, my mother, my two brothers, and myself. And there came a knock at the door. We all ran to the door because we thought my dad was coming home because the war was winding down. It was 1945, April 1945. We thought it was winding down and he was coming home. But instead, we got the bad news that he had been killed in action. It was devastating. And we all went back to the table and just sat there and numb. And then my mother started to cry, and then we all started to cry.
Many soldiers came from the poor countrysides of Canada to join the army as a volunteer. And that was not only because of patriotism. Alice Charlebois also had other reasons.
We moved to a farm, and he worked on the farm, and we all worked a bit, but he was the one that worked the most. He wanted, when he was older, around 18, he wanted to go and work outside and earn money. And of course, my father didn't want him to, so because he wanted him on the farm. So he ran away and went and joined the army. Of course, my mother was upset, and us too. You know, it was just starting. Well, it wasn't just starting, but you know, it was like a shock. we didn't want him to go, of course.
Leo Bouvier also chose to join the army. He and his younger brother Maurice went as well. Maurice decided to follow and join the tank regiment of his brother so they could fight side by side. But meanwhile, Leo had another position in the army. They were young and fearless.
I don't want to lie, but I wanted to see the world. I got to tell the truth. And that was one way of seeing the world. I don't think I was that patriotic then. I am now, and I always was after, you know. But I think that's what it was. Who's patriotic? Maybe today, because kids are smarter than we were in my time. You know, we had better schooling today than you had in my time. And Morris really wanted to come with me too, into my field too, but it was too late. He only in the army less than a year, and he was overseas. But I was in Canada 2.5 years before I went overseas. I got to be an instructor, you know, and everything else.
Maurice never came back. Jack French's brother never came back as well. Even though there is a difference of 10 years of age, Jack still has great memories of his brother Cecil.
I remember with Cecil, I used to go on hikes with Cecil when I was a little guy. We were 10 years roughly apart, but he used to take me on hikes. And I remember this one hike, we were on this escarpment, very treacherous trail, all of me and my cousins. And Cecil played a game with me. He made out he fell over the cliff, but he was actually standing on the ledge below. And he said, "Oh, Jack," and then he went down, then he came back up laughing. I mean, I always remember that. But Cecil always, it was games like that he played, innocent games. And oh yes, I've missed my brother Cecil. I know all these medals he has. He won the wet medal for sharpshooting, and his team came out #1 for sharpshooting over in England. But Cecil said of all his medals he won, that's the medal he cherished the best, because it didn't kill people, he said, that medal. And he always cherished that.
Once in Europe, new friendships arose between the boys, sometimes very intense, like the friendship between Bill O'Donnell and Wolf Sulkin.
I was originally in the artillery, where I became a first lieutenant. He and I first met at what I believe to have been a very famous British Army training camp, Aldershot, if my memory is correct. And we became very close, almost intimate friends. We made a promise to each other that if one survived and the other one didn't, we would look up the other one's family. And he said to me, "Will you please, if it comes to this, will you please tell my daughter that I love her?" So that was my promise. In the Algonquin Regiment, where we were fighting literally side by side, that Bill was killed in action.
Waldo Jongsma was born in a remote house on the prairies of Alberta. His daughter, Beverly Penner, was 6 years old when he joined the Army. She has few memories left about it.
My parents got married very young. My dad was 19. My mother was 16. They had 6 children. I don't remember him going. I have very little remembrance of my dad, except for one occasion I can remember very clearly. He was home on leave. Because he was in his uniform, and he was down on all 4 like a horse, and my sister, a year younger than me, was on his back having a horsey ride. And I do remember the day that we found out that he had been killed. I just remember wandering around town all by myself and going to different, why I did this, I don't know, going to different houses around town and everybody being so sympathetic and kind. That's all I remember.
Morse was a great grand soldier. His good-hearted nature and constantly high spirits were an inspiration to his, a great example to his whole troop. I didn't know he was in Germany until I got the map coordinates, and then I went to see his grave. Yeah. Anyway, I got to this farm, and there was a woman there. I would say she was maybe 52 years old. When we got into the yard, she come to meet us. I could make her understand, and she could make me understand. I didn't speak it that much. Anyway, we talked, and of course I told her it was my brother. And at one time I asked her, well, where's your husband? And it was so sad, you know. She said, my husband is dead, but I don't even know where he was buried. You know, that really hit me, really hit me. Anyway, if you look at the picture that I will show you, she put flowers around my brother's grave every 3-4 days. And it showed it. I looked down and there was fresh flowers. So I emptied my Jeep. I give it everything I had. So, but that was a sad day for me, really. Yeah. But that was a brave woman, I'm telling you, she was a brave woman.
That I made a promise, I'm going to keep it. I told her that I kept his picture with me from the day the war was over. In all my travels, if I was working, it was in my office. If I was retired, it was on my desk at home. But wherever I was, there was Bill O'Donnell.
The last time I seen my brother John was in Niagara Falls at home. It was the day after New Year's. We slept together. And my brother Tony, with 3 of us in one room. And at that particular time, I wasn't in the service. I was at a job, and I got up in the morning, and I didn't want to wake him up. So I crawled over. I was up against the wall, and I crawled over him and left and never said goodbye. And And he went into Groningen. And I believe it was March the 1st. And on April the 13th, 1945, he was killed. He was a stretcher bearer.
It was Fred Forbes' brother Arthur, who died in the Army, that made him decide to follow him. Fred didn't survive the war either. His sons, Kenneth and Larry, still commemorate their father to this day.
I'm coming into the Redcliffe Legion in Redcliffe, Alberta, and I'm going to go by some pictures here of the veterans that went to war in World War II. There should be 218 pictures here, plus a few from the Korean War. And I'm going to go down along the line here and show you where my father is, his picture, and it's right here. My dad is buried in Holland, but with this cenotaph we have here, it is my dad's grave in Canada. And we're so proud of what he did, and as the community of Redcliffe are very proud of what they did as well. Of the 218 people that went to war in Redcliffe, 7 didn't come back.
I don't come down to this one that often. We have our own, and we're about 5 hours away, and we go every year to the Remembrance Day on November the 11th and have a family of 10 people, including my grandchildren, that go to these ceremonies, and they take full interest in what we're telling them and what they're observing. And it's very meaningful and sentimental for me.
Albert Hunter was only 2 years old when his father died. For a decade, he didn't know his stepfather wasn't his real father.
When my mother remarried to Cecil Hunter, I thought he was my father. I knew nothing. And one year, or every summer for summer holidays when we lived in Windsor, I used to go to the farm where my grandmother lived. Albert's mother and dad lived out in between West Lorne and Rodney. And I used to go out there for the summer. But my stepbrother was never allowed to go. And a 9, 10-year-old kid, 8-year-old kid, no, well, why not? I don't know. Of course, I rubbed it into him that he couldn't go. One year, in 1953, I was out on the farm in Rodney. And that is when my grandmother, Albert's mother, told me that I was adopted. And, and from that day on, I was never allowed to go back to the farm. Because for some reason, my mother didn't want me to know at that young age. And
the letters that Albert Bushensky wrote to his beloved Gladys show how much they loved each other. Albert wrote his wife almost every day. Gladys saved most letters and gave them to her son Albert.
gee, it sure would be nice if I was home and you and I had a nice little home. And we are just waiting for Junior, which would be me, to come along. There's over 200 I've never read. I probably haven't read half of them. I get too emotional. And he was a very romantic guy. They were deeply in love.
June Smith's father, Ernest England, was in the same carrier as Albert Bushensky. Both died during the liberation at the battlefield in Holten. Ernest left Canada, his wife and children, in 1940 and never came back home. It's always remained a sensitive subject.
Whenever we would bring up the subject of my father, she would manage to give us just a very short answer and then cut it off. So she never talked about him or their life together. As I say, she was an angry woman, but she never let it affect her care of us and never talked about it with us. Today, I would like to have known a lot of things. And I don't have any letters that he sent me because presumably she would destroyed them along with all the rest of her letters. But I don't have any, which is a shame.
Soldiers who did return did not always have it easy. That was also the case with Leo Bouvier. He tells us how it was when he returned to his residence in Gravelbourg, Saskatchewan.
It was very lonesome when I got back. I got back 6 months later, after the war. So everybody, all the others were gone and got land. I didn't have nothing. I met another guy who was overseas with me, a sergeant. He was a friend of mine. And we started to drink. But I got married within a year that I come back. And if it hadn't have been for my wife, I would have probably been an alcoholic. So it was a lonely time for me. I missed my comrades. I don't know why I let you guys come and talk to me. Anyway, but I guess it's good to reminisce and,
Before my mother passed away, an awful thing to say, I had hoped that my stepfather would die first. And that's when I would have taken my mother and myself over there. But that didn't happen. She died first, so.
I feel proud of him because I don't think about the fact that he left us. He left us for a good reason, for his good reason at the time. I'm proud of him because of his liberation of Holland, and him more particularly after we went down and seeing how grateful the children in particular would come up to us and say, "You grew up without a papa," and they would hang on to us, onto our legs and squeeze us. And so many children would come up to us while we were there. You can't help but be glad and be proud of him having done that.